All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to our talk today. It's called Reprogramming the Brain, a guide to the future of the brain and neuromodulation, written by a patient, which is me. My name is Benjamin Stetcher. I'm a patient advocate living in Toronto, Canada, and Alfonso Fasano, who's my neurologist here in Toronto as well.
Hi, everyone.
So yeah, we're going to be walking you through this presentation and giving you a glimpse into what our new book is going to be all about, Reprogramming the Brain. So it starts with my journey. And the way I like to think about starting my journey is this picture here. Now, this picture is over 100 years old, and that person in the back is my grandfather. And something I think about a lot, and something I'd like to ask Alfonso about is, how would you actually explain everything I've gone through to somebody like him? Somebody who has no understanding about what even DBS is. What's the first words that you would use to actually describe what everything I went through to somebody like him?
Finding balance in your brain. I think, as you know, in Parkinson's, there's deficiency of some neurotransmitters, including dopamine, and because of that, there are certain parts of the brain that are working too much. So DBS is there to regulate the activity of these targets. In particular, in your case, it was the subthalamus. So I will describe it as a way to regulate the activity of the brain, especially the excessive activity of the brain.
Okay. I've heard of it talked about as quieting the brain noises.
Yeah.
Would you say that's accurate?
Yes and no, but yeah, it's clearly an easy way to put it to explain it. There's a general rule that we all go by that is better better to have no signal than a wrong signal. So DBS is there to jump the brain signal, the pathological signal coming from Parkinson's. So we're shutting down a particular part of the brain, subthalamus in your case.
Okay, very good. Now, I'm going to walk you through the journey I've been on. It began for me in this place, Nairobi, Kenya. Here I am as a baby. And as you might be able to tell, a lot has changed between that picture and now. However, I came back to Nairobi almost 30 years later after this picture was taken. There's that next picture that was taken then. And at that point, though, I had a pretty pronounced tremor, and I had some stiffness and rigidity as well. I was 29 years old. I was doing pretty well for myself. I was living and working in China at the time. However, I realized soon afterwards that China is not going to be a very good place for me to live long term with a disease like Parkinson's. And so I came back home and I pretty determined to try and do something about this disease for myself and see what I could do for others as well. I then became an advocate. I started to speak all over the world. Here's the first talk I gave at McGill University. It's almost 6 years ago now. And I've since been on a pretty wide-ranging journey trying to understand what is Parkinson's disease, and more importantly for me, what are the best therapies out there that might help individuals such as myself. I found them, funny enough though, in Toronto, where I got this kind of deep brain stimulator implanted in me. This is me just after I left the hospital almost 3 years ago today, and that's after I came home from getting the battery implanted in my chest, the wires tunneled through my neck, and the spikes drilled through both hemispheres of my brain. Now, Alfonso, I'd love to ask you a kind of personal question. Now, obviously, I think if you were to get this done, you'd want to get this done here in Toronto.
Yes, I would say so.
But I'm wondering, which part of this surgery do you think would be the scariest part for you to have to undergo yourself if you had Parkinson's?
Probably the intraoperative part while I'll be awake during the procedure, particularly at the very beginning when the electrode starts getting inside the brain, because I know that that's probably the riskiest part. I would say most people will be scared, in particular of the drilling in the bone, because it's very noisy, but that per se is not really risky.
No, yes, that's definitely the most acutely scary part of this whole procedure. But I would say that I put too much of an emphasis on the day of the surgery itself. Because obviously, as you know very well, I've been through a lot since the surgery. There's a lot of days that I wasn't properly prepared for myself. So I'm wondering, I guess, what are some of the other things that you'd be wary of going into something like this? I mean, what do you think would be the most painful part of this procedure? It wasn't actually the day of the surgery itself, the first surgery itself.
Well,
and sometimes a patient, because we're talking about big patient.
Yeah, post-operatively there is pain sometimes. During surgery, the anesthesiologist, pain management is the focus, but what happens at home might be painful because the anesthesia will wears off, and painkillers maybe are not as strong as the one you use in hospital. So there's no doubt that after surgery, people might experience pain or even other strange feelings that we described in the book actually after surgery. But back to your question, I think another scary and perhaps painful one would be putting the frame. How was that for you?
That was very painful, yeah. But after that, it was actually more painful for them to freeze my scalp rather than the pressure of the frame itself.
That's it.
Um,
And they have to freeze it before they place the
yes,
frame.
and they freeze it by like stabbing you 15 times in the head.
With needles.
Yeah. Move on though to individuals and populations. Now, this is something that I've become acutely aware of thanks to the work of Alberto Espe, and that is that we treat populations of people. However, each one of us is an individual in our own right, and this is very well summed up to me in this book that we wrote together. I wrote this with Alberto Espe. Almost everything we know about this disease comes from studies into groups of people. Those people get plotted as dots on a graph. A line then gets drawn through the middle of the group, reflecting the group's average. That average becomes the result of the study. In average, almost none of the dots falls on. And that's kind of articulated again here through this graph that I kind of found. But yeah, I think it's very important and this is something I'd love to ask you again about as well, but how do you actually match a therapy to an individual? Because we have these clinical labels that we use, like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or frontotemporal dementia or whatever it might be. We have these other basket of therapies as well. In my opinion, it's the symptoms that guide the way. It's the symptoms that allow you to say, okay, maybe this patient will respond well to this therapy. But again, I'm just guessing. I'm not in your shoes. So I'm wondering from your perspective, what is it like?
You're not in my shoes, but you know this field, this point, and you've gone through the process yourself, and you've seen how I approach this when I discuss with people living with Parkinson's. And you're right, we go after the symptoms, and that's because we have symptomatic treatments. We don't have cures. And the moment we have cures, we will look at the disease and what caused that particular disease, and then we'll give a cure that is targeting the process or the processes at the basis of that problem. But since at the moment we only have symptomatic treatments, we go after the main problem that the patient has. And we also look at many other factors, how safe it is to do something, and more importantly, what are the inspirations of the patients, the values of the patients, what really matters to them, because everybody is different. You might have two people, both with let's say resting tremor that is disabling, but to one person maybe that's not a problem, to the other person maybe because it's someone that does public speaking, that is a big deal. So it's not just looking at the symptoms or the sign that the patient has, but also what matters to them and how safe things are. And then we decide the best possible course of action. So as I always say, our job is to match the best possible treatment with the right candidate. And there's not a one size fits all, as we all say. That's why, as we described in the book as well, a lot of this is the conversation, the journey, and understanding what part in your life you're at when you come to see me for this.
Well said. Now, another part of the problem that really complicates this is access to care, something that we talk a lot about in the book as well. But I'm wondering, and I have this new adaptive version of DBS, how much is these new technologies actually exacerbating problems of access to care? Because every time there's something new that comes online, it becomes more difficult for like the wider proportion of population to actually access that kind of therapy.
Yeah.
How do you think about that problem?
Yes, so there are multiple issues here. First of all, let's start with this graph. This is taken from Sarah Rigier's thesis. And this graph is meant to say that access to care is not just related to advanced options like DBS. This is actually a much simpler problem and yet quite widespread. And perhaps even more relevant than having access to DBS. In Sarah's thesis, the point is that neurologists and patients don't spend enough time together, and patients have sometimes difficulties in accessing their doctors and trying to find solutions on a day-to-day basis. But back to your question, you're definitely right. Probably at this point, we need to just clarify what adaptive DBS is. So Ben didn't only receive deep brain stimulation, but he was part of an international study looking at a new type of deep brain stimulation called adaptive deep brain stimulation or closed loop deep brain stimulation. Maybe if we have time, we'll talk about this later or in the question sessions if there is any. But the point that you're raising is a very good one, because obviously with technology, we have new devices. And unfortunately, these new devices become more expensive, and therefore is not always easy to offer these treatments to populations, for example, where the healthcare is not public, or where there are not enough centers for specialized care. In Canada, healthcare is public, but it doesn't mean that there's an equal representation of all the DBS patients in the country. Some regions of this country are underrepresented. There are not enough doctors, even family doctors, let alone neurologists, even more problematic if you're looking into something very specific like deep brain stimulation. In other parts of the world, the problem is the cost. There are maybe neurologists, but if you don't have the right insurance or if you don't have money in your bank account, you cannot have access to these treatments.
And even somebody like myself who has access to some of the best care in the world, as you might be able to tell, I need adjustments from time frequently as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's definitely not a cut and dry issue, and we haven't solved this problem quite yet, but we're getting there, I think, slowly. So I'm going to take you back in time to the time of my diagnosis. I did what I think a lot of patients do at the time is I went to Dr. Google and I found pictures such as this one here. Now, I don't know what you guys think, but I don't think I bear much resemblance to what this guy's experiencing. This is from Dr. James Parkinson's notes. So I looked in my memory bank and I thought, what are the other references that I have to Parkinson's? At the time, I only had two really. One was Michael J. Fox, and the other one was this guy, Muhammad Ali. Here he is in Atlanta, Georgia, lighting the torch for the Summer Games, obviously. However, there was a point I remember where I looked at this picture as kind of the future that I was doomed to live. So I could see the frozen expression on his face. I could see the obvious tremor in his hand. More importantly, I could see the dystonia as well in his hand there, that kind of cramping of the muscles as well. And I could probably tell that he probably has that in his feet as well. So this, at some point, this became kind of like the future I was doomed to live to some degree anyway. However, now I don't have those problems anymore, thanks to this new thing called DBS. But I still have a tremor from time to time that does pop up here and there. What is deep brain stimulation therapy? I'm going to hand this over to the expert for now. Give us a guide into what is DBS. How do you describe it for the layman?
Yes, deep brain stimulation is stimulation of deep structures in the brain, and this stimulation is delivered with these probes that you can see in the MRI. Usually people receive two electrodes, one per hemispheres, and at the end of the probe, there are 4 contacts or even more with more recent technologies. And the neurologist set the programming in a way that we can stimulate the area that we want to stimulate with certain parameters. I won't go into details. If you're interested, we can discuss about this later, or you can read the book. But simply put, we are stimulating with electricity a part of the brain. Classically, this is done with continuous stimulation, which is still standard of care at this point. This is not experimental, by the way. It's been around for over 30 years, so 3 decades. And more recently, as you heard before, we are now using devices that can adjust and adapt to what they're recording inside the brain. And this is closed loop stimulation, something that is already approved in some countries, like in Japan, and is slowly becoming more and more standard in other countries, and probably is going to be approved in the States and possibly Canada within a year from now.
Now that's more technical definition. For me, though, deep brain stimulation has really been this. It's allowed me to play again. It's allowed me to be free. It's allowed me to live parts of my life where I don't have to worry as much about my symptoms anymore. Here I am with my niece and nephew. This is taken about a year after my surgery. And you can see that I was able to live my life almost carefree to some degree anyway. And that's allowed me to play again. It's allowed me to travel again. It's allowed me to live my life, do the things I want to do. So for me, that's what DBS has been. It's been this freeing thing that's allowed me to go out and live in the world the way that I want to live, not be so riddled with this disease all of the time. How effective can DBS be? Now, there's a lot of different ways that I could describe how effective it's been for me as an individual, but I'd love to hear from Dr. Alfonso Fasano. How effective can it be for the average patient? I mean, this is what I experienced, basically, where that giant wave that I was on, the on-off fluctuations, it shrunk almost drastically to the point where I had almost no symptoms from time to time. I felt almost completely cured at other times as well. But is that the average experience for most patients? Which most patients expect when they go through with deep brain stimulation?
Yeah, this is an excellent point, Ben. And I will say that this way to represent what DBS can do is the best way, because DBS is not better than levodopa, which is the main treatment used at this point for Parkinson's. So some people come to DBS thinking that they're going to be cured, or they can be even better than they are when they're on levodopa. Maybe DBS is more effective than levodopa only when it comes to tremor, because sometimes levodopa doesn't even stop tremor, and DBS yet can do that. But really, the main focus of DBS is to have an even motor condition. So the main reason to go for DBS is either motor fluctuation or complications of levodopa therapy, such as dyskinesias. So that's why we do this. It's an even motor condition without dyskinesias. And as you showed in this graph, it's no more these ups and downs of motor fluctuations, but it's more of a maybe milder fluctuations during the day. But this is really what DBS does best, because it's a continuous or semi-continuous stimulation in the brain night and day. And actually, even talking about the night, you probably can tell us more about your sleep. How was your sleep before DBS? How is your sleep now?
Before DBS, I was getting maybe 3 hours of sleep per night continuously.
Yeah.
Now I can sleep like a baby again. I think that's partly due to the new adaptive settings, because I felt like my sleep improved even further after we turned on the adaptive settings. Not exactly sure though. I have another question though about this kind of wave. How often does DBS itself induce dyskinesia? And how easy is that to fix once it becomes a problem for patients?
Yeah, that's another good question. So it depends on the target. As I said earlier, DBS improves dyskinesias. Now, if the electrode is placed in the globus pallidus, it's a target that doctors call GPI. The stimulation of the GPI per se stops dyskinesias. But there are reasons why, for some people, we go for GPI. For some other people, like yourself, go for the subthalamic nucleus that we call STN. Subthalamic nucleus stimulation mimics the effect of levodopa. And as you know, levodopa can cause dyskinesias, and therefore DBS of the subthalamus can cause dyskinesias. Yet people have an improvement of dyskinesias. This is usually because, thanks to subthalamic stimulation, we can lower the medications, and therefore there are no more peaks of levodopa, and that's why people don't have dyskinesias. Now, how many pills were you taking before DBS?
7 or 8 full tablets.
And now how much you take?
Today I didn't take any. I haven't taken anything for a few months already.
Okay, which I didn't know. But anyways, this is just to say that levodopa is drastically reduced after DBS of the subthalamus, and that's why dyskinesias improve. I should also say that in some people, even when we lower medication, stimulation can still cause dyskinesias that can be quite disabling. And with programming over time, usually we find a way to mitigate this problem.
Okay, let's move on. So what does DBS feel like? Now, this goes to what we were talking about before, but I think that one of the ways to describe, or one of the ways that is the most traumatic part of this procedure for me anyways, was, as Alfonso mentioned, the drilling of the boreholes through my brain. I've actually given this talk a couple different times in a couple different places, and twice I had somebody faint at the next picture that I showed, where it's just the actual drilling of the boreholes through my skull. I think that's what this is being showed anyways. I'm not sure how much surgical experience you have in your life, but maybe can you help explain what exactly is happening in this picture? And keep in mind that I was awake for this entire surgery as well.
Yeah. Well, I used to go to the OR because in the OR there's just the neurosurgeon, the anesthesiologist, and other personnel. The neurologist is usually in the OR because we can check the effect of stimulation. We can see whether it works. We can see if there are side effects. And sometimes the neurologist is there to help with the assessment of the patient. So that's why I used to go. I don't go anymore because in Toronto we do enough procedures that the team in the OR is well experienced and they don't need a neurologist. But what you're seeing right now here, first of all, you see this arch. This is the frame that is used, and this uses the classic coordinates of space, X, Y, and Z, to locate the target. So with the software, the neurosurgeons plans the procedure beforehand, and we look at the neurosurgeons looks at the target, the trajectory, and then they just need to insert those numbers in this special frame, and with this arch they can target that particular spot in the skull, And what you see up here is the insertion of the probe itself. Yeah, this is the second side. I can see that the first side was already done here, and
that's the cap, right? That's what you can see. I don't know if you can see it in the video right there, but you can see the remnants of that right now.
Yeah. And then, of course, this is the bone that you see in the picture, and then the skin is brought back, and stitches are put in place, and usually, that heals fast, and nothing major is visible unless you have my haircut. With your haircut, I don't think much is visible.
Well, maybe you could talk a little bit about the differences from center to center as well, because there's a lot of differences in DBS.
Yep.
Like, for example, one part that I was not aware was that I was actually sliced from here to here. They cut all the way through and then they peel the skin back.
Yep.
I've seen that in many centers, they don't do that part. Other centers also, they have the patients asleep for the entire procedure.
Sure.
Why are there so many differences in how DBS is actually done from center to center?
Well, because things change over time, and probably this is just to emphasize that it's not that it's one way to do DBS, and actually it's not that we don't do surgery in people asleep. We can also do that. So we trying to use the best technique depending on the person that you're dealing with. For some people very anxious about this procedure, there is no point in doing it with the patient awake. It will be actually more problematic to the patient and to the team in the OR. So in these cases, we will do the procedure all asleep. As for the cut, the type of technical aspects, that is to do with the experience and what is comfortable to the neurosurgeon. The last thing you want is the neurosurgeon that is not comfortable with the technique that they have perfected over the years. So at the end of the day, doesn't matter how you get to the procedure and how the procedure is done, as long as it's done with the standard that that particular center is used to.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of other questions that I have, a lot of other things that I could go through, but we need to rush through this. The rest of this. What are the other options that I had before my surgery? Well, those are the 4 other main surgical options. However, it's important to emphasize that I could have just waited and seen maybe one of the new therapies would come online as well. But yeah, we can quickly run through maybe what these 4 categories of options are. First is deep brain stimulation. We covered that one already. CRT, cell replacement therapies. In your opinion, when will this ever be a viable option for people with Parkinson's?
It might be. There is a lot of interest in cells replacement therapy. There's been interest for as much as I can recall. First trials started actually at the very beginning of the 90s, and in some cases also earlier than that in the 80s. So a lot of people think that this is the solution, and I don't know if it is a solution, because you need to remember that this is just a group of cells that are implanted in a brain in a toxic environment, and the cells are not necessarily going to do what they're supposed to do. We don't know cells biology to this level that we can actually let them do the connections that we want them to be doing in the brain. But at the same time, after many failed trials, more recently there have been a lot of discoveries in cells biology, and now there is a way to engineer these cells, or even retro-engineer cells, or create cells like dopaminergic cells from the skin of the same person that is receiving the transplant. So right now this is still very experimental, but there are trials going on, and there are a lot of companies with interest in this right now. And things are moving quite fast. And for sure, I can say that we'll have a better understanding of where this particular option will go in a couple of years.
All right. Next, we have focus ultrasound.
Yeah, focus ultrasound is something that is quite easy to grasp. It's like a very specific and precise microwave oven, basically. Patient's head is put in a special helmet in an MRI, and the neurosurgeons can locate on the MRI the spot that wants to be destroyed, and we destroy it shooting ultrasound from many transducers all around the brain. So there's over 1,000 very weak beams of acoustic waves, but they all converge in one spot, and that spot is the one we want to lesion. So focus ultrasound doesn't require any opening, so that's why people like it. But at the same time, and that's why I described it to you, we need to recognize that this is a brain operation like any other, an operation with irreversible, to some extent, effects. And so the fact that there is no opening doesn't mean that it's not risky, and people need to be aware of that. But it's a good option for people that don't want to have an open surgery, particularly for people with unilateral tremor at this point.
And gene therapy.
Yeah, gene therapy is something also very promising because we are better at understanding how the disease originates. There's a proportion of about 15% of Parkinson's patients where it's established what is the genetic deficit. And this means that with viral vectors, just to give you an idea or an example, we can infuse the part of the DNA missing or misbehaving in the brain, and the brain can start producing the protein coming from this new piece of DNA inserted in the brain. So this is very promising in my opinion. At the same time, there are some unknowns, especially when you use viral vectors, for example. And more importantly, this is something that won't be applicable to everybody. It will be only offered to particular groups of Parkinson's patients where we know what genetic deficit is at the basis of their problems.
All right, like I said, we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to skip through the rest of this. This is just some of the other therapies that I could have waited for. 3 pillars of DBS, deep brain stimulation therapies. Basically, this slide is all about how I think unless patients have access to great surgical teams, a great neurologist who knows them very well, and a great family environment to come home to, I think that they should not be allowed to have this surgery at all. I think unless those 3 things are there in place and they're secure, then you might want to consider one of your other options as a more viable candidate. That's my surgeon, Sunil Kalia. Here's my parents who got me through the surgery, I credit them with helping me in a lot of different ways, both physically and emotionally recover from the surgery. And of course, there's Alfonso Fasano and his parents in Nusco, Italy, where we actually wrote much of this book that you hopefully will have in your hands very soon. Yeah. And then, what does recovery look like? I'll quickly run through this as well. So this is how the recovery process. One thing that's striking about the first picture is I was actually down about 145 pounds at the time. I'm now over 200. Maybe Alfonso, you can talk quickly about the weight loss and the weight gain that you experience after DBS.
Yeah, weight loss is something that we don't want to see. It means that probably there are too many dyskinesias or tremor or rigidity because these are all activities that burn calories. But for the same reason, when we treat them, then people might gain weight. And sometimes they gain even more weight because of the effect of stimulation itself. So it's important to monitor the weight, something that Ben is starting to do now, finally, and is losing some weight.
Yes. All right. Do we have time to show this video?
Yeah, let's show just this initial part of the video. Again, probably this was the day when we started programming the brain.
1 month after the surgery.
I know, it's to make myself look a little
Yeah.
long.
And
Let me see without any compensation.
maybe the one part that we want to look at is this one. This is how the programming happens.
Oh, go back for. Oh, sorry. Oops, I'm sorry.
I can.
Just so you can see the effect of it turning on. And
Okay.
Spread your feet a bit more.
so you see my turn, and then boom, it turns right off. Yeah. That shows how quickly this procedure can work for some people.
And I bet a weird thing right here. Yeah, there's
What's
there's
up?
an ant. Oh.
Okay, and at this point, he was having
This is an example of when
and,
never happened to me. But, yeah.
for Mika in Latin and in Italian means ant. And in reality, it wasn't coming from DBS. He was actually found to have an ant that was crawling on his forehead, and it was never happened to me in my life. That was
Shows that not everything is DBS.
Yeah.
False DBS anyway. What are the side effects of getting a surgery? Well, one of the ones that there's actually quite a few side effects I could speak about, but one of them that I want to talk about is mania. Maybe Alfonso can elaborate a little bit more, but what exactly is mania? And then how do you know if a patient is going to experience a manic episode or not?
Yeah, so it's something that you probably hear from time to time, that DBS can change your personality. In reality, it doesn't change it, or maybe I should say it's rare, and if it happens, it's reversible. So DBS of the subthalamus facilitates many motor behavior. That's why people are not slow anymore. They can move better, but sometimes it also facilitates the desire to do many things, sometimes even more than you actually were supposed to be doing even before DBS. And it can also create an excitement to do these things. So this is in simple word what mania can look like. And like I said, it's reversible as long as the doctor is aware of what's going on, and we can change the settings. So Ben had such episode, which is described in one chapter of the book, and we could revert it back because we could tell. Well, I know Ben, and I could tell that he was too happy to making too many plans. He wanted to be prime minister of Canada at some point. He wanted to be a comedian at another point. So I could tell that this wasn't the original Ben. In other cases, the family tells us. That's why one of the pillars of DBS, as you saw before, is the family. And actually, without the right family or caregiver or support around the patient, we will never do DBS.
Well said. This is just a quote that I think all students out there should try to embody in themselves. It is important that students wearing certain ragamuffin, barefoot, irreverent to their studies. They're not here to worship what is known, but to question it. Just an important thing to important note to leave you guys on. And with that, we'll say thank you all for listening. Thank you all for taking the time, and thank you all for hopefully buying the book as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Reprogramming the Brain. Bye for now.